My biggest lesson learned from Fraser Robinson was that relationships are everything. Yes, we can kill it. Yes, we can do incredible things. We can put numbers on the board that no one has ever seen. But don't forget that this is a human business on all sides, inside the business, outside the business, on either side of the marketplace. That's really, really stuck with me and how I think about like teams I want to spend time with, people, founders I want to spend time with, etc.
Welcome to the Early Podcast, where we interview the best and the brightest who've built the world's most innovative companies. Hosted by me, Max Crowley. Tune in weekly for new episodes, and please, please, please like, subscribe, and share. And now for today's episode. Let's go. Candice Lo, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Max. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for joining me. And we had a little bit of technical difficulties, but I think we're good to go.
Of course.
Let's dive in.
Oof. All right. How far back do you want to go back?
So you're born and raised in Hong Kong.
Mm-hmm.
What was that like? And how did your family end up there? What did your parents do in Hong Kong?
My parents ended up there. My dad was born there. My mom was actually born in Shanghai and moved to Hong Kong when she was about 3 or 4. And it's kind of wild. I was just back with my family in Hong Kong and asking for more details. But it was around the 50s. And at that point in time, the Communist Party was in charge. And my grandmother had actually flew down with my mom and my aunt, and my grandfather had already moved to Hong Kong 3 years prior. So it was kind of a wild time. Yeah. And then my mom worked for my grandfather. My dad had his own gallery. He was an antique art dealer. And I actually lived with my grandparents the first 4 years of my life. My parents were saving up because my dad was starting his own business. So I felt very much raised by my grandparents very early on.
Very interesting. And then you moved to the U.S. when you're 10.
Mm-hmm.
Why did your family decide to move there?
It was 1997. Hong Kong was handing back over to China from being a British colony for 99 years. Felt like a land lease, but it wasn't political. They were going to put restrictions on my dad's business. So we moved to New Jersey, and like many immigrant families, of course, we moved to a town in the middle of nowhere, New Jersey, where my uncle decided to settle because they had good schools. So we moved to Jersey, north of New York City, so my dad can commute. Bridge and tunnel.
What, had you been to the U.S. before?
I had been to the U.S. to visit my uncle, but on the West Coast. Maybe one time before that. I think my parents were sussing out whether or not they should move to the US. It was between that or moving to Canada. But then I think they thought for the business it made more sense to be near New York City. So
a little bit of a different feel than Hong Kong, I'm sure. What was your dad doing when he got to the US?
He had moved his gallery over. So he's a Chinese antique art dealer. Even when he was living in Hong Kong, he would do New York, London, Hong Kong often because that's kind of where a lot of the business was. And he had basically started from scratch and reopened his gallery in New York. So that's what brought us to the East Coast. It was so different. I just remember my first week of school, everyone asked me to point on a map where I was from, and I had no idea. Just no clue. Yeah, it was definitely very different. We had grass for the first time. We were used to living in an apartment. We had a home, like a proper house, garage. It was so. Those little things are really quite weird and quite odd.
What's the coolest artifact that you've seen in your dad's gallery?
Oof. I'd say he specialized in a few things, but I'd say some of his coolest things were jades. He specialized in very old jades. And they were usually either mythical creatures or animals or fruit. And I just always really loved his jades. I think that's kind of where my love for statues and sculpture comes from. But yeah, I mean, as a kid growing up, definitely didn't appreciate it. As a holiday vacation, he'd take us to any museum that we would, in any city we were visiting. So he thought it was fun and dinner chat with all my uncles. All the cousins would look at each other and we'd roll our eyes. But my dad's one of 6 boys, and 4 out of the 6 boys are antique art dealers. So when they got together, it's just nonstop work chat. But I kind of wished all of them wrote a book, their own volume of the same experience, because I think actually it would be kind of fun to read.
Wild. So
you settle down in the U.S., you go through the normal sort of U.S. school system, you end up in college. Your mom, unfortunately, passes away in your early 20s, a pivotal time for you. How does that set you up for sort of your adult life? As you graduate from school, you do your first job out of school. You're still this person who was born outside the U.S. and came here at a really early age. I mean, this is an interesting time for you and probably just a lot going on.
Yeah, I think growing up in the US, it makes me very aware of where I'm from because I didn't look like a lot of the people around me. But I think a lot of my classmates were immigrants too and or first generation. And I think we were all just taught to put our heads down and work hard. I think when I lost my mom, it was my senior year in college, first semester, like all through the holidays into the new year. And I was so thankful to my professors. They were all incredibly kind and really just was like, how do we get you to graduate? And I think it just forced me to grow up very, very fast. I think that was a big change in my life and really turned it upside down. But it made me be very independent, very, very focused. I dove headfirst into work. And if anything, I think that was more of a way to distract me from the sadness, the pain, the grief. So work ended up being a really big escape for me. In my first job after school, as well as at Uber, I just buried my head in work.
And then how did you hear about Uber? So you're at KPMG out of school, and then when do you hear about Uber for the first time?
I was actually in San Francisco visiting my roommate, who actually was also at Uber, Dana Bisordi. And Dana, I introduced to a college friend of ours, Scott Monroe, who was one of the first driver operations managers in San Francisco. We went to college together. He gave me a promo code to take a ride. I didn't use it till I was back at in Boston. And I was really hooked because I had to travel a quarter of the time for my work at KPMG. And the taxis were smelly, gross, unreliable. Like, I have to get to the airport at 6 a.m. and half the time they didn't show up. So Uber replaced my taxis to the airport and I was hooked. I think the first week I started actually was in Boston. The general manager who ran the city at the time looked at me and goes, I know probably everyone who has ridden more than 30 times in this city, because at that point it was super early. And he's like, I knew your name. I was like, yeah, work paid for all of it.
So you were really riding at that point.
Oh yeah, I was riding at that point. It was like late nights from the office, to and from the airport, because it was actually really reliable. It was expensive, but Uber taxis were really expensive in Boston. It's like $40 to $60 per ride, and Uber was slightly more expensive, but I could get a ride. So, and it didn't smell like vomit.
And this is like fall 2011, something like that.
Yeah, somewhere around there, 2011. And then Scott called me up and was like, hey, we're thinking about international expansion. You speak another language, you're from somewhere else. Would you ever want to go back to Asia? And I was like, absolutely. I think my family always pressured me to go back. It's like, oh, take this corporate job, join this bank, join this consultancy. And I was like, I'm just not sure that's what I wanted. And I think this gave me the opportunity to go back on my own terms. And that's when I started interviewing.
Yeah, I think the criteria at that point was just, you're from anywhere, and you speak any other language, and you just go there and launch Uber. Doesn't matter where it is.
Dope. And they're like, just go. I'm like, yeah, okay, I'll go.
Here's a box of iPhones.
Ooh, struggling iPhones. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't even know that was a thing, but we might need to get to that. How did that work with the iPhones overseas?
Depends on every country, how easy it was for us to buy. But we would go into an Apple store. It was like one of the first stops we made after landing in a country. We'd go in and be like, how many iPhones do you have in stock? And if you only have 30, how many more can we get by the end of the week? Like, I need you to aggregate all the phones across the city, across all Apple stores. And then we became literally some of the best business accounts for Apple. We used to take these photos of how long the receipts were. We would buy 50 at a time, as much as they were willing to give us. I just remember the first time I walked in the Boston office, they just had boxes stacked, from floor to ceiling. Every corner there was space, they'd shove it there, but it was boxes of phones, iPhone boxes, phone stands for the cars, headphones strewn everywhere. We were just constantly surrounded by boxes, wires, charging stations, USB strips. Like, it was probably just our lives for the good few first 3 years of our time at Uber.
Well, it's such a random factoid for the average person that we had so many iPhones, but nothing else to me encapsulates Travis's just go do it. It doesn't matter. Growth at all costs, relatively speaking, move quickly. That was a defining thing where, again, obviously we were controlled in other ways, but that get phones in drivers' hands and the app only works that way. That was the game for a long period of time.
Yeah, for him it was like speed. I don't want the phone to be a stopper for us to get a driver on the road. That shouldn't be a reason why we can't get a car on the app. So let's just move fast.
Going back to the interview process, so Scott Monroe, you get in the mix, and what's the process like? Because I think for you, it ended up being a fairly long period of time.
It took me 6 months.
Crazy. I mean, so many people would have just obviously given up very, very, very quickly in that process. So take me through the 6 months, and then specifically, the analytics test was such a pivotal step for so many people. What's the analytics test? How'd you do on it? Obviously pretty well. Yeah. What do you remember from all that?
It was 6 months because there was a really long lull in between. And I had started exploring new things and new jobs because I love my team at KPMG. I think it was just really hard when 80% of my work product would get shelved when a deal would die because our clients were big funds and they wanted us to do diligence. But my first interview was with Austin Geit, who was the head of expansion at the time. She would be my first boss at Uber. And after you kind of pass that sniff test, she give you the analytics exam because most people failed there. She's like, okay, let's not go through all the stages if you're not going to be analytical enough in Uber's eyes. You had 2 hours, an Excel spreadsheet of data. They give you quick instructions, a few key questions, and you had to analyze it and get the answer back to them. It was timed. And Deval, who was in charge of grading all the exercises, she was one of the early launchers. And I didn't realize this until years later. We were sitting around in San Francisco and she goes, yeah, we only passed 10% of people. And I was like, what? How the heck did I pass? It just had no idea. But I think, and I asked her, I was like, how did I pass? She was like, I think we interviewed so many people who were incredibly bright, great resumes. They tried to build a model in 2 hours and it was just too complex. So you just kind of looked at the data, did a pivot table, analyzed it, see how the business trended and answered the questions. And she's like, I also like that you color coded. I was like, oh, great. I'm glad. And then after passing that, they would give you a creative exercise, which was much easier to assess whether or not you had fun enough ideas for partnerships, marketing, stunts. I don't know if of course you remember we used to do Uber kittens back in the day where we deliver kittens to offices in people's homes. What would be a localized version of that stunt in Hong Kong or any other city that we were interviewing for? After that was an okay. Then you went on to 2 or 3 more interviews.
And what was the lull in between? Why did it take so long to end up actually getting to the end of it?
So I don't know if this was the reason, but it just kind of felt like it completely went silent after this stage. I interviewed with Ryan Graves, who is the COO of Uber at the time. He's probably one of the most optimistic people I know. He's like, we're talking hypothetically about what it would be like to launch Uber in Hong Kong. Hong Kong has a culture of full-time drivers. They worked for families, private families, or they work for companies. And I still remember this moment because sometimes you get out of an interview and you're like, oh, that did not go great. Something's just wasn't clicking. And then he gave me a few chances. He was really pushing me on the idea of converting these drivers, these private drivers, onto Uber during their downtime to really optimize their capacity and boredom. And I was just skeptical because culturally, I was like, oof, I don't know how comfortable people would be having random strangers in their private cars. And I was just kind of stubborn about it. It's I just really think there's a big cultural barrier that's not where I would go. And I could just feel like I blew that interview coming out of it. And then they went quiet. So then I was like, oh, I think that went great. And then a few months later, I'd say 4 or 5 months later, I get an email from Sophia, the recruiter. She's like, hey, do you have time to jump on a call with Austin again? And I was like, yeah, sure, no problem. And Austin asked me, after a bit of updates, asked me to fly to San Francisco for in-person interviews. And I was like, yeah, And I could make that work with work. And then within an hour, I got an offer in my inbox. I was just kind of shocked. I was like, holy moly. And that week was kind of nuts because I got the Uber offer and I got another offer for a fintech business out of Singapore. So it was just like, I'm either going on the road with Uber or I'm going to move to Singapore and take this job. And I'm very happy I took Uber. And I think in those moments, I was like, that's truly felt like luck. It's like, I'm just really thankful she called me back. And I was like, that's wild. And I think all along the way when I was meeting everyone, talking to people on the team, interviewing, even though they were tough, like I was just very impressed by the team. And I just kept thinking, wow, I really love to work with these people. And I was like, it's been over a decade now since we've launched Uber in Hong Kong, and RG's right. Ryan was right. We have a lot of private drivers that actually are on the platform now.
Was it the smarts? What was it about the Uber offer that made you want to do that over anything else that you were considering at the time?
I think it was team and product, and not the app product, because remember back in the day with like clip art cars and the app looked really ugly. It was just like the ugliest app ever. I think it was the business model. Like you're going to have an asset light business that takes commission and really optimize underutilized assets and cars and people's time. And then all along the way, I was just so impressed. I'm like, everyone's really close to me in age. They're not too much younger or older than me, but I was just like, wow, I feel like these people would push me and really encourage me. And I just felt like I wanted to learn from them. So I think those were the kind of two criteria.
So you get going at Uber. Uberversity is sort of your kickoff where you do training in San Francisco. What's the beginning of your Uber experience like?
I started in Thanksgiving, over Thanksgiving week. And my first week was actually in Boston, where I got trained up on what it meant to be driver operations as well as a community manager, because I needed to do both jobs as a launcher before those roles were hired. So, I mean, Max, how many tickets would you have to solve in a day back in the day?
Way too many. People have no idea how much customer support we were doing at the local level, both on the driver and rider side. It was nuts.
So it's crazy. I still remember tickets are customer support emails people would write in. And this was before like Zendesk would have macros where you could automate a lot of it. We would just copy and paste or use text expander. But I remember sitting next to Nick, who was your counterpart in Boston, and he would just make me watch him solve tickets for 2 hours straight. And then he'd give me a batch to solve on my own. And I did the same on the driver side with Matt, Mara. That to start. Then I went to San Francisco for Uberversity because everyone would do a intro to Uber on site, the headquarters. And I just remember, because it was like you hit the ground running. Austin had Matt Apkin be my launch big brother. He was in charge of getting me all trained up and going. He was getting ready for a pop-up in Utah.
For Sundance, I think.
Yeah, he was getting ready for Sundance. And I was going to Baltimore, Maryland for my first launch solo. I just remember where I was trying to do onboarding, but I also was really focused on making sure we could launch Baltimore because I was going straight there after San Francisco. And there were kind of like a few key moments. None of them were like so sexy, wow, but it was just like a moment that really stuck with me. We're standing around trying to solve a problem. And Blaine, who was on the Phoenix, Arizona team at the time, Travis was asking him a question and everyone was huddled around him. And he's like, look, I don't want to throw anyone under the bus. And Travis goes, no, do not do that. Don't not tell me what's going wrong because you don't want to get anyone in trouble. Like, no one's going to get in trouble. We just want to make sure we learn from that and not repeat it. So you got to tell me what happened. And I think that just sets such an incredible tone of like how we problem solved together, how we shared. That was just like, ooh, okay. He's giving me permission to be really open and upfront, frankly, with what is happening. And I didn't come from that world. I came from a corporate, big office, big organization, and we had a lot of layers and protocol. So this was like really refreshing. And I was there the same week as the holiday party, and Travis gets there late. And I just remember him going around the room, meeting everyone, shaking everyone's hand or sitting next to someone and asking them what they did. It's like, hey, I'm Travis. What are you going to be doing here at Uber? And I was like, ooh, the CEO is sitting down and just like curious about where we're going to be, what we're going to do, what brought us here. And he'd be super engaged. And what's wild is that he would remember everyone. I'd probably say Travis remembered everyone's name up to like 2,000-3,000 people at the company. I knew who was where, who was doing what. I just found that really, really impressive.
Yeah, no ego. Everybody's important. Everybody's opinion matters. It's the best idea wins. And I mean, he embodied that for sure. All right. So what was the launch function exactly? And why were you interested in that? Because that was not an easy job and experience.
Yeah, maybe it's naivete. I saw the job description. I was 25. I was like, ooh, this is as close to a dream job as I could have imagined. I already traveled a lot for work. And then this was like, go start essentially a small business in a new country tomorrow. And we'll like support from San Francisco. And I think that it was just a great way for me to be on the ground, start from 0 to 1, and get to see new places and work in different environments. I always thought that'd be the most intriguing. I did most of my work travel in the US, and this was going to get me all over Asia, maybe all over the rest of the world. So that really pulled in my heartstrings. But it is a hard job. It's a burnout job. Like you do it for a year and a bit, and it's hard to do it any much longer because we'd start a business from scratch. You get the company set up, you get the lawyers in place, you hire the team, you start building the business, getting the cars on the road, building partnerships. Back with when the word influencer meant like we're the mover shakers in every city, making sure that they knew about Uber and helped to spread the word, doing a press launch, throwing a launch party. That's essentially the job description of a launcher. And we were the first boots on the ground. Company called us SEAL Team 6. We'd land with a suitcase, a laptop, an iPhone, a BlackBerry, and an Android because we still had those back in the day, a BlackBerry. And to make sure we like tested the product, made sure everything worked, make sure just everything was smooth as possible for us to go live in a city and flip that switch. So that's essentially what we did.
And your first really sexy country was Baltimore.
So much so. I still remember like living in an Airbnb back then. We were power users of Airbnb because it was actually the cheapest way for us to stay. Everyone's like, oh, your life was so glamorous. I was like, no, our budget was $60 a night. Definitely wasn't glamorous. We also didn't have a lot of budget. And I basically would be in the co-working space, programming phones, doing work until 2 a.m. most nights. And there was like a small group of Nepalese taxi drivers in Baltimore, brothers, cousins, like uncles, they're all family. And they would always have a car parked outside the co-working space to pick me up after work. This is pre-lunch, before there was even Uber. And I'd call them and be like, they're already outside for you waiting. I was like, who else is getting a car home? And I'd still remember there'd be nights I'd be like, I can't believe I have to program 50 phones in the lab. And in the next like 12 hours, like pull all-nighters crying alone in the co-working space because I was so exhausted, so frustrated, so done with these iPhones. But we launched the week that the Ravens won the Super Bowl in Baltimore. And it was the only time I really had riders not get pissed at me for making them wait an hour for a car. Everyone was just drunk and happy and like ecstatic. But yeah, Baltimore was my first sexy city.
It's a successful launch. Good way to go. And so I know
as successful as it can be. My hat's off to the DC team. They were incredibly helpful to me.
So then you end up in Asia. I know you end up launching a few other markets, but eventually you lead your way to Asia. Where did you land first? And I mean, were you nervous at all? Were you scared to be back at Asia? Because it'd been a while at that point since you'd lived there.
I mean, I'd go back every summer to see family, but it's different, right? Like you're not living there. My first country was Taiwan. Went to go launch Taipei. And I remember Austin picking up the phone and goes, Candice, I think you need to go to Taiwan next. And I'm like, okay. And I told her my first sentence out of my mouth is, my Mandarin's really rusty. She's like, it's okay, you'll figure it out. And I'm like, this was like before Google Translate was really good. This was like, I'm like, all right. And he's like, don't worry, we already have a teammate hired. I think you guys will support each other. It'll be fine. And I was like, thank God for the driver operations manager, Willie. His family had actually owned a bus company. So he actually understood like transport regulations really, really well. And I don't think I would have survived Taiwan without him. But yeah, that was the first city. First place outside of the US.
What's your first memory from like landing in Taiwan? Because that still has to be pretty striking to go from a couple of these US launches and now you're in Taipei and you've got a launch business there.
I landed in Taipei, which I'd never been to. Never been to Taipei in my life. It turned out to be one of my favorite places I ever lived. I spent a summer there, 3 months, launching the business from start to beginning. It's not a super international city. There's not a ton of expats. I still remember the deal. Willie looking at me, be like, "Your Mandarin's not great." I'm like, I know. We're going to work on it. He's like, "I'm a little
Thanks,
worried."
Willie.
I'm like, yeah. It was like, "I'm a little worried about this." And I was like, "We'll figure it out. It'll be fine. It will be fine." But it was stressful because Matt Atkin, who I mentioned, he was sorting out Sundance and I had landed first. He's like, "I'm going to be here in a week. I need you to line up all the meetings for me." And I was like, holy moly. So I don't really think I even had time to think. I just set up lawyers, bankers, bank accounts. We'd hired a translator real quick just to make sure we didn't screw up anything legally, figure out the structure, the tax structure. And he was like, "Bring me, set up all the meetings. I want to meet and see everyone," just like as a QC quality check. And then after 2 days, he's like, "All right, I'm going to leave you. I'm going to go back to Arizona or Utah." I was like, "So is everything okay?" He's like, "Yeah, you'll be fine." But it was like fast, no time to breathe, let's go. And we just kind of hit the ground running. That was a crazy, crazy summer. We then hired the community manager in Taipei, Daphne. And in Asia, the Valentine's Day is actually a different day. It's in July, I think. And remember we used to do like global rose delivery on Valentine's Day? Yeah, well, we had no budget. And basically we were sitting in the office dethorning like buckets of roses to deliver. I just remember Daphne looking at me. She goes, "I will never do this in my life again. I will pay someone out of my own salary to do this next year." Oh,
whatever it takes.
yeah. She's like, no, I don't need 200 like roses on my office floor ever again. But there were just like lots of those moments, us trying to really figure out regulations. It's wild. Taipei's driver limo regulations fit on half a sheet of paper. It was the simplest, but also the vaguest regulations that we came across. And as a society, they're very like orderly and rule following. So it actually took a little bit of time for us to negotiate with the limo partners to come on board because they're not the most like risk taking, quite careful. So yeah, I'd say that cars were always a challenge. I still remember Austin saying to me, "Candice, stop scaring all the cars away," because I had like 2 failed launches before that. And I just really thought like, oh shit, she's gonna fire me, hands down.
So speaking of Austin sort of infamously was the main launcher. She owned launch. She built the playbook. I mean, the playbook was literally called "If Austin Dies," which she has sort of that sense of humor. That was at least the first playbook that I saw. What do you think made her so exceptional and able to do sort of this mammoth global expansion? I mean, I know from my experience from her, it's just carefree, but in a really interesting way, crazy organized, diligent, could just ingest a problem, scope it quickly, make it really simple to execute, and then follow through and make sure other people did. And just in a really natural way. I mean, a natural leader. What do you think made her so great at this?
2 things: perspective and being able to really distill an issue and just be able to like make it clear to everyone the severity of an issue. I think there'd be moments where she shifted from, "Oh, you can totally onboard 50 drivers in an hour. What's the issue? Let's walk through that. I'll talk you through like how I did it." And I also think that, I mentioned everyone's kind of close in age, but if anything, one of my biggest lessons I learned from Austin was how crystal clear she is, not only in how she thinks, but also how she communicates. She really taught me about what it meant to have a fine line between being someone's boss and being someone's peer. Given we're all in our 20s. We're all young, we're close in age. It's hard not to relate to each other that way. And I would always know when Austin was being boss Austin and when Austin would be checking up on me. She'd like have all these serious discussions with me, set really aggressive goals. Let's like break this timeline in half and be able to deliver at the same quality. But then she'd always be like, "But do you need help? What do you need? Are you okay? You sleeping? Are you taking care of yourself?" So I think for me, it was just incredible clarity, really like distilling it, and also very human, right? I don't know if I had so many bosses that would always be like, "Are you okay? Are you sleeping? Are you staying alive?" Because there have definitely been moments of burnout, big moments of burnout for me at Uber.
When did you end up on the, I'll call it China project, China expansion? Because now China's a whole new ball game when Uber decides to dip its toe in the waters there and then go big. So when did you get on that project? And what did you understand at that time of sort of the scale of that ambition? And also, were you living in China? Did you move to China? So a couple questions baked in there.
I was in Kuala Lumpur. And yes, Austin was my boss, but also Sam Gelman, who was the head of rest of world expansion. And I remember him calling me. We were in Kuala Lumpur, actually. We were in person. I had just about to soft launch Malaysia. And I remember we're walking from the office to lunch or something. And he looks at me, he goes, "How do you feel about going to China next week?" I just looked at him like, "I need to soft launch Kuala Lumpur." And he's like, "How do you feel about going to China next week?" And I'm just like, "Who's going to take this on?" He's like, "We'll figure that out. But you have 2 cities to pick from, Guangzhou or Shenzhen." And I just looked at him and I go, "Oof, all right, I'll take Guangzhou because they speak Cantonese." And I was like, that I would just feel so much more at home. My family worked there as well. So it just was like, okay, let's go. I don't really think I understood the scale of China and what it was going to become for Uber until the day I woke up and Travis was on the front page of the English paper, like top of fold. It's like a big picture of him. And it says, "Uber is going to 100 cities in China by the end of the year." And it's a picture of him on stage at a conference with a map of China behind him. And I was just like, my first reaction was just expletives. And I was like, I don't know how we're going to do this. And then I called my then counter boss operations, who was Alan Penn. And I looked at him and I just called him. I was like, "Alan, Travis just announced that we're going to be in 100 cities by the end of the year. And it's like February at this point." And he's like, "Yeah, I think we're going to have to figure this out." And that's when I realized, okay, wow, Travis is really investing in China in a big way. This is going to be nuts.
I mean, how many cities was Uber in at that time?
We had just launched Beijing. Like, you knew, all of us would stay up for New Year's from Australia all the way to the West Coast, Hawaii, actually. And we had just finished launching Beijing over New Year's Eve. And it was 4 cities, Shanghai, Shenzhen, Guangzhou, and Beijing. And the challenge was Uber was a US app using US technology, and we were behind the firewall. So everything from maps to payments to point of interest, where you type in a building and it might pop up the address, just didn't work because China worked on all of its own rails and systems and mapping for security reasons, for different reasons. And just all these things were running through my head, like, this is going to be really, really hard. I also thought, I think I might break down. But it was nuts. It was insane. It was like nothing I'd ever experienced before.
How many cities did we end up getting to in China?
Here's the thing. Travis announced 100 cities, which isn't wild in China because there's over 200 cities with a population of 1 million people. 200 cities. That was an easy runway for us of where to launch. And just volume, population, density, growing GDP, concentration of where everyone lived and worked, although they were massive cities. But we ended up getting to close to 150, 200. Ended up being a lot of remote launches because it was a brand, people were aware, always in the newspapers. So it was wild. It was the biggest portfolio of cities for Uber at the time.
When you get to Guangzhou, what was the main duty at that time? I mean, I assume hiring was intense. Was there a team already on the ground? What did that look like?
We had launched Shanghai. It was kind of wobbly and not as big as it could be. Basically, all of our clients were expats using Uber in Shanghai because they would have VPN on their phones, be able to use the app. Google Maps was sort of working for them. Guangzhou was probably the 3rd city after Shenzhen. And at that point in time, we had thankfully hired a driver operations manager. We had a new launcher starting who would then go on to become the general manager of Beijing. So and then we also had a marketing manager. So the team was quite stacked, which was lovely. And then everyone can kind of focus on their roles. Basically, I was interim general manager until we hired a general manager, which took us 9 months to find that general manager. So I would still be running the city while also launching other places. And we were focused on drivers, we were focused on partnerships, really understand what it meant for us to grow this business and also get to learn China more and more and what it meant for us as a US company to be there. And what we really wanted to fix were maps, payments, points of interest. Because you can't locate a rider and a driver and you couldn't pay for a ride and essentially our app fell apart. So I just remember all of us lobbying for engineers from San Francisco to come to China to see it for themselves, like the pain. And thankfully they came. There was like a group of 10 of them, kind of locked them in a conference room in Beijing, got them to use the app and see how broken it was. And they just did a hackathon for about 2 weeks, week and a half, to try to like understand what the issues were and then find a solution, hopefully work to fix it.
When does it flip from, expats sort of using the US version of the app to full Chinese operations, Chinese app, onshore data centers there?
I think it gradually happened over time, but 2 big partnerships and investors that we had. One was Alibaba and one was Baidu. So Baidu became a really big investor in our Uber China business standalone. They helped us with maps because Baidu was essentially the Google of China and they had the mapping technology. Google was blocked in China, so a lot of the tools that were Google driven just wasn't working for us. So that was a really big turning point, both on the investment and local support, but also on the mapping technology. And then Alibaba became our payments partner and at some point an investor as well. So for us, I think it's usually we do those big partnerships later stage in our businesses. We had to get these done super early. So it was interesting from like a fundraising corp dev partnerships perspective too. The BD team came in really early to get it to work.
So you do launches outside of China. You're operating the business outside of China. Now you're in China. What stood out to you at that time as sort of the main difference of the Chinese business or operating in China generally than outside of China?
As a company, we had the ethos of hiring local, doing business local. And I think that we could not have been successful in China if we didn't embrace what it meant to be truly local, whether that's the teams we hired, whether that's like how we look at it from like a marketing lens. Like some of the stuff we did on the ground in China would like never get approval for in the US. It's just different. Like we would be, one of our most viral campaigns was getting Uber branded teddy bears and the riders would go crazy for them. They'd be like Easter eggs in cars, do it for special promos. They would go viral on WeChat, which was the equivalent of like social media for everyone in China. So it's essentially like our Instagram. And the teddy bears would just be the most popular, hottest item that everyone wanted. But being truly, truly local, which also had its challenges. And we had a requirement that everyone had to read, write, and speak English and had to be from that city. And I think that there's some incredible talent, like everyone's at least bilingual. Mandarin, their local dialect, English. And then many of the teammates spoke like another European language. Like all of them spoke like crazy amounts of languages. But which then made for a really hiring challenge. Like you had to hire people from tier 1 cities like Shanghai, Beijing, Shenzhen, to then get excited to move back to their hometown, which is a tier 2, tier 3 city, to then go run that business on the ground back home. So we were really trying really hard to be very, very local.
How long did you end up operating in China? Like how long were you actually in China on the ground and working on the business there?
3 years. We landed and officially really started doing business 2012, 2013. And then, we sold the business to the competitor, Didi, in 2016. At that point, the competitive incentives, the competitive scale was just wild. Like, it's exhilarating, exciting, unimaginable, traumatic. And thankfully a really great outcome, really bittersweet because it broke the team apart. And I think all of us were just so incredibly close and tight. It ended up being a combination. And I don't know how Travis negotiated this, but he was like, I want to give everyone on the Uber China team an opportunity to come work at Uber outside of China. So it's not really the end of their journey at the company. And if you think about most M&A, that like never happens. So he was really focused on making sure that like the team could be as okay as they could be.
I mean, I know things sort of escalated to obviously the end point of the business selling. What were some of the crazy moments of just hiring and driver issues and fraud? What stands out?
So there's one law in China where if there's a gathering and more than 50 people, it's inciting a riot. And that manifested in a way that we never imagined, which was because the apps were taking over, it was us Didi, and a few other players, taxis would go on strike. Hundreds of taxis would just block up big boulevards in China and be protesting. And what we didn't see coming, or at least I didn't, the governments and the regulators would come to all the apps and say that we're inciting a riot because they're complaining about the business. And that just really changed everything. I was like, wow, we are now big enough in a foreign country for it to cause this much commotion. I think it was the speed, the scale, the strikes that then turned into regulatory challenges, police raids, and then competition was really fierce. We had spent billions in competitive incentives for riders. It was just like nothing I'd experienced. I think when the solution to us launching 100 cities by the end of that year that Travis announced, I became the head of recruiting as well. And at that point, it wasn't a job I knew anything about nor wanted. I just remember Alan at that time, my then boss, looking at me and goes, so you're going to take over recruiting? Because I had to build a plan. I was like, how are we going to make this possible? Like I modeled a headcount plan, really thought about timing, what it meant for us to really get this done. And I just kept looking at him and go, no, not a recruiter. Like, he's like, so you're taking over recruiting. I'm like, so you're not really giving me a choice. He's like, I need you to be the head of expansion and also take on recruiting. And we ended up hiring 250 people in 6 months ahead of all of these launches that we wanted to do. At that point, regulations was heating up, competition was really heating up. And I've handed recruiting back to the professionals, and they kept charging away. And then that was really like a job I didn't want, but something I learned a ton from. Like, so when your boss tells you to do something that you don't want to do, but it's what the business needs, sometimes saying yes isn't so bad.
Dive in.
Yeah, dive in. But yeah, it was really, really like nothing. And to this day, I don't think it will be comparable to any work experience. I think coming out of that too, some of it is just like, we'll hit chaotic points in businesses and people look at me and be like, why are you not stressed? I was like, well, if no one's getting arrested and there's no raid where we're being held in an office, then everything else is solvable.
All right, so what was the raid story? When were you held in an office?
I was in Hong Kong because I would work from the Hong Kong office quite a lot. I was in the Hong Kong office and I was coming into the conference room, just jumping off a call, and I remember the general counsel in Asia at the time looking at me as I'm going out, and he just looks at me, and there's a group of men like behind him, and he just whispers, he goes, we're getting raided. And I'm like, oh God. So then I went out one door, he went in another door, ushered everybody in, and I just looked at the entire team and was like, we're getting raided. And what's weird is that you talk about the launch playbook. We had a raid playbook. It's like, how do you stay safe? It was a safety playbook.
Yeah.
On how do you stay safe during that? And that's when, we had a physical security team. We had like, just how do we manage all of this? But I got stuck in the office for about 4 to 6 hours. And my husband was texting me. He was like, are you in the office right now? I'm like, yep. He goes, it's all over the news that you guys are getting raided. And he just realized, he was like, wow, what, are you going to be okay? I was like, I think so. It's a bit of trauma bonding. I mean, I think, Max, we've been through a lot of that together too. But I think because of that, not much shocks me. I don't know whether that's a good thing. Like, maybe I just do to make sure I still feel my body. But yeah.
Yeah, normal feelings. Was there ever a moment where you were scared? I mean, or frightened or nervous? I mean, I don't know, just obviously the raids and other things, but just even being, yes, you were born in Asia and born in Hong Kong, but still probably just being on foreign soil at times or in China. I've been there. Beijing can be a little eerie and different and very orderly. I mean, it's definitely a different place.
Yeah. I loved my time in China. I think I just still remember there was one moment I was doing a one-on-one with my boss and regulations was really heating up. It was like that last year and a half in China before we sold the company. And it felt tense. Like I've not really felt how thick the tension was until that last bit of time. Because I'd say I'd be managing a portfolio of 8 cities. They each take turns going through a regulatory fire, whether it's a taxi strike, whether the team is getting hauled into the regulator's office, or there's a raid, office raid, onboarding raid, all kinds of stuff. And it was at least 2 cities every week was dealing with turmoil. And I was like, oof, like the risk of anyone on the team, including myself and some of my colleagues getting arrested was quite high. And I just remember looking at my boss and telling him, I was like, I'm feeling a bit uneasy. And a bit is probably an understatement. Like I just was like, I knew I would be brushing up against this, but not to this extent. And I think there was like a real worry for me is like, I don't know if they'll like, I just don't know. It's just so many unknowns that we were worried about. Like, what's going to happen? Are we allowed to be here? Are we going to get kicked out? All those things.
Well, yeah, you mentioned it about Taiwan, but just generally, these are places where people follow rules significantly more than other places. And, our sort of attitude of, let's charge into a city, let's make things happen. Obviously, we tried not to do anything illegal, but if there was gray areas, we would try and, take advantage of that. We obviously believed in what we were doing overall, but in Asia, that's not necessarily how people operate. And so that definitely, there was a tug and pull for sure.
Yeah. Besides regulation, you had the culture of like, look, the government takes care of us. We follow the rules. It all works here. Like, why are we pushing their buttons? And it's unintentional. I think we just got so big that people started to pay attention. And we're like, whew. I mean, it was like feeling like you were between a rock and a hard place. Nothing other than that. It just felt uncomfortable.
What did you do after China for Uber? What was your experience after that time, after the business sells?
I think everyone was just sad. Because then you go in thinking that you really want to stay and really want to make an impact. And at that point, Uber had not many tech companies or US companies had really tried to dip their toes in China. And that was, just ambition or naivete, love for doing business there. Life after that, I have you to thank. I moved to London. I ended up working with you guys on the business development team. And my goal was to launch the B2B business outside of the US in the UK market and also to roadmap what the rest of EMEA might look like. And that was hard. Like, I think talking to so many people who are in the enterprise space, I look at them and they're like, you're trying to go from B2C to a B2B business. And I was like, yeah. And they're like, whew, that's definitely like a challenge in itself. And I have to say those 6 months of working on the Uber for Business team was one of the best learning experiences I had at Uber. I don't think it was obvious because it's a small team, new business, but building and recruiting a sales team is like nothing I have ever gone through. Nothing.
It's totally
right,
different.
Max?
every time it comes up still, when people say they're hiring a sales team, I start spouting all my learnings very quickly. Because it's different. I mean, I think the Uber experience, part of what was great about it was we were all missionaries, all hands on deck. We just wanted to win. We wanted everybody to succeed. We wanted the business to succeed. All high tide makes all boats rise. That's what I felt the whole time. And then you get into more of a sales culture and it's very different. It's how much you going to pay me and what's my bonus. And that's amazing. You want those people around. You want those people to have a certain set of skills. But as you're trying to build this enterprise business, and we were just getting so much demand from the consumer side where people were just expensing rides anyways, that I think the value proposition even today is still not so clear when someone can just easily toggle a credit card. I mean, there's really the consumer features, I think, from a business standpoint that I still use, toggling profiles, toggling credit cards, being easily to expense a receipt. That did most of the job.
But man, that taught me a lot. If you look at, I didn't realize this, I had a friend tell me, if you look at most Fortune company leaders, the majority, over 50% of them, of the leaders have experience in B2B sales. I didn't really understand it until I went through it. And I was like, I get it. To truly scale a lot of these big enterprise businesses, you have to understand what a sales team can do, the power in that. So I actually was I learned so much.
Yeah, if you break down business generally, I mean, I think Uber again was a little bit different because we had this sort of new age operations function that doesn't necessarily exist at a lot of companies. But for the most part, you're either building a product or you're getting people to use it. You're selling the product. And I think So that's a dichotomy that, definitely from the U for B, Uber for business time, I experienced a bit.
I was just thinking about this moment because before we had cultural values in the company, and this is completely like left field, but before we had cultural values, we had a launch manifesto, and every launcher passes this on to the next launcher that comes on board. And there were about like 8 values, and everything from like nothing can't be done to like done is better than perfect to like practice confidence in Uber's methods. And I have to say there's one that like just makes me think of you every single time, which is be bold in networking, because you represent the coolest company in the world. And we'd always just like tell the story of your kill pack. So we wouldn't ever leave our like to go for a day out at work without kill pack, which was our business card and a promo card for people to get free rides.
Nothing was better than selling Uber in the early days. It was obviously my favorite thing in the world. But yes, I would have on me, it was like leaving the house, wallet, keys, phone, and then my kill pack, promo cards, business cards. You never know who you're going to meet. You need to be ready to go, get them signed up. All right. So looking back, what are your core sort of 2 to 3 learnings from being an early employee at such a fast growing startup, especially with just the global operations that you are involved with is just so differentiated from so many other people's experiences?
I'd say attitude and optimism. I think I learned that even starting out in the interview process, but Uber wasn't obvious yet when we started. It was really like rolling up your sleeves. I didn't go to an Ivy League school. I didn't come from like a big bank or private equity firm. I just felt lucky I had a job and could pay my bills. And I just felt like it wasn't obvious. I wasn't obvious. Like, why did Uber hire me? And then I think I look around at everyone and I just noticed something about my colleagues, and all of them were just like embraced optimism and a can-do attitude. Yeah, like we had a lot of sleepless nights. We worked really long days. But the work wasn't sexy. Like we talked about you doing customer support tickets. Like I remember we'd have days where we had like 1,000 unsolved customer support emails like open. And then, everyone would just roll up their sleeves. Like no one thought the work was below them ever.
Yeah, never.
Yeah. So I think that attitude was really incredibly important as we hired and also as we scaled, because we were quite decentralized as an organization. Uber has no network effects. You had to grow the business as individual P&Ls essentially in every city, every country you went to. I think that was the secret to us maintaining our culture and growing together. I know I talked about it a little bit before, but like everything's going to change, especially in a fast growing business. So expect the unexpected. I've had the most rock climbing career that I think just didn't make sense. It wasn't linear. It's like, what did I really do at Uber? But I think that if we're focused on doing what's best for the business and we're dedicated to like really excelling at that and, running through brick walls as a result, then I think it's actually quite fulfilling. So when your boss tries to tell you to do something and you don't want to, keep an open mind. Just do it. It's worth it. It'll be worth it. You never know. And I think this is something that is really hard to share with people outside of the company. And it's open communications. I don't think people understood or truly understood how open we were, whether that's data, whether that's file sharing, whether that's like, just chat. It was so open. And we had big milestones. We had all these challenges, problems, learnings from all these different places. And for me, we documented quite well too, but like I could be having an issue with driver payments. And I remember chatting, at that point, I think it was Skyping like Scott Gorlink. They're like, hey, can you walk me through this? And he'd give me like 20 minutes, 30 minutes of his time. He's really busy. Like he's really, really busy and barely sleeping, but he would without a hesitation. And that's true of people who've just like done really well, playbook what they've done and shared. There was no like hoarding, no secrecy, no sharp elbows in that sense. Like we were competitive, but like it was, okay, you guys beat us this week. What did you do? Now tell me what you did. Let's go try that. And I think that was our secret sauce, hands down. And then I'm going to add one more. I know that's a lot of learnings. My last job after Uber for Business was working for the head of business in the EMEA region. And for me, coming from like a super operational role, we were so data driven. For him, like my biggest lesson learned from Fraser Robinson was that relationships are everything. Yes, we can kill it. Yes, we can do incredible things. We can put numbers on the board that no one has ever seen. But don't forget that this is a human business on all sides, inside the business, outside the business, on either side of the marketplace. And that's really, really stuck with me and how I think about like teams I want to spend time with, people, founders I want to spend time with, etc.
That's great. And I'm glad you threw that last one in there. Fraser is the man. All right. So post Uber, I know you've dabbled in both, sort of investing in fundraising and, helping founders in new ways. What's sort of the core difference that you've experienced looking back now, having obviously operated the way that you have, and now also helping founders, working on investments, other things of that nature?
I think my experiences are quite starkly different. I think Uber was also an extreme. We're so hands-on, real doers, problem solvers. Let's go fix things. Let's go do things. Let's succeed. And I think having gone into venture, I think the best lesson I learned was letting go. Because at the end of the day, the founders are the heart and soul and really working hard day in, day out. And I think that we talk a lot about how we can be helpful to investors, helpful to founders as investors. And I think that only goes so far. I think it's like being helpful when they need us and me not being a hummingbird. Hovering. It took a little bit of time to get to that sweet spot. And now it's fascinating because we saw so much at Uber and I feel very fortunate about like the scope and the openness that I feel like because I've been inside of a company, I think my empathy and sympathy is quite different than I'd say other investors who've not been inside of a company. And it's like a way for us to relate in a different way. I don't even think it's some sympathy or empathy. It's like we just relate differently.
Absolutely. All right. So a fun one to end with. Any interesting content you've consumed lately that you want to share?
This is a bit nerdy. It's a podcast called Empire. I went to India for the first time last year and just like had an incredible time. And I wanted to learn more about the history, the politics from one colony to another, me having grown up in a British colony to India. Empire really walks through history, government changes, how that really has shaped and evolved like the mindset of a really big country. So yeah, I've been really, really into that one. How about you?
Oh man, now I'm on the spot. Let's go. I don't know, nothing, just random YouTube videos. I'm way too much time on YouTube. Well, now I'm going on my journey too. So I'm going to be, try to read some like self-help books and all that kind of stuff and some fun fiction books.
I'll send you a few, you send me a few.
Making my list. All right, Candice, you're the best. That was great. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you, Max. So good seeing you.